Hello and welcome to Salesforce Trails and Trials, where two Salesforce architects and special guests share their wins and woes so that you can learn with us.
Erik, it's great to see you today.
Jon, good to see you too. It's been a while.
It has been a minute. I think we enjoyed a little bit of just a small hiatus, and also, a big event for my daughter. I had a little bit of preparation there, which was exciting. Everything went great this last weekend. And When looking at the calendar, I saw we just passed our 1-year anniversary. So happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary. You and I have had probably 2004 to 2022. We've known each other for 18 years. So this is our second kind of anniversary. We have many anniversary types. We meet up in San Francisco at Dreamforce. We have lunch together every year at Dreamforce.
Yes. Chinese food anniversary.
That's right.
Yes.
Happy anniversary.
Yes. Well, I must say, I don't know whether anybody's going to listen to this show or not, but I can say it has been such a delight to share the mic with you and to learn and to just become a better purveyor of this kind of Salesforce consultancy and expertise, and just helping people make better decisions and go about it the right way. So really
me too. When I think about this show, it's a pleasure for me, first of all, just to have a reason to talk to you every couple of weeks, plan the show, and then do the show. And then you have a great team of people who do the editing. So thank you, team. That makes it easy on both of us. Yep. And, I think about this, who our audience is all the time. And I love the fact that you can be you and I can be me, and our our audience are people that care about architecture or consulting or project management, or just the things that we've talked about over time. I couldn't tell you I'm passionate about consulting, but I used to do it, and or project management, and I used to do it. But these are things that I realize are all relevant to getting your solution out the door or implemented or whatever. And, it's good to have somebody else talk to you about
and
that.
those are terms that describe, kind of functions. But if you think about beneath it all, as it's distilled down, it's really about helping people improve their lives. It's about helping people go through these processes in a way that gives them a better experience, that helps them to get more satisfaction and dignity out of their work.
Avoid pain.
Yes, exactly. So to me, those are the kind of people first components that I get really excited about. And so I'm excited about today's show. And I do want to shout out to Luke. Thank you so much for making these shows great after we go through what we do, and taking out our, buts, pauses, and various omissions that we want to bring out later. And so well done. It's wonderful to have a great team. And I don't know where I'd be without it.
Not doing so well on podcasts, probably.
Right? This is true. So real quick, we're coming out of, we just had Trailblazer DX, right? As it was renamed this year, a couple weeks ago or so. So maybe you want to give us a couple highlights from that. I wasn't able to attend as I was in Israel enjoying time with my daughter, but any highlights that came out of that for you?
I was in South Africa, so I didn't make it either.
Oh, awesome. Well, I have some, I know what was, I reviewed the items after the fact, and I've dug in. And so my elements of what I've learned lately have to do with what was at Trailhead DX or Trailblazer DX, excuse me.
Yeah.
That I loved hearing about your trip and seeing the pictures.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, I was actually pinging somebody. You and I have volunteered before at the same Ask an Architect booth.
Yes.
And in advance of Trailblazer DX, I was in contact with the team there saying, we're going to do this, right? And you need to call the technical architects and sales engineers, because we are dying to staff your booths, and we love that contact with the customer too. And they said, we'll let you know. And then they came back to me, and then I found out it's right where my vacation was. So I couldn't actually do that. I couldn't wrangle a spot for you. I'm sure it wasn't as large as it once was, just because of COVID, still a factor. But what did you like that came out of it?
Well, this will be a great transition to what I've learned lately. So I think what I loved about it was we saw more of kind of why Salesforce and Slack wanted to get together.
Oh, good.
Was a key element. I think there was a lot on MuleSoft as well, and there was a lot on Tableau as well. But that what I really focused on was kind of the marriage between Salesforce and Slack, and kind of how that's going to be kind of making its way out. Now, what I love about it is it was back about 3 episodes ago, as you were digging into Slack and
Yeah.
trying to put together something, the complaint you had was I had to use middleware to actually make this work. And that's really going to keep people from taking advantage of all these great options and Slack actions and the block kit UI and all of these things if we have to put middleware and host something on Amazon or Heroku or whatever to make it happen.
Yep.
So
Yep.
now Salesforce is releasing, right, what they're calling Salesforce Platform for Slack,
Yep.
which is essentially a method that you can leverage Apex and then down the road also Flow in Slack so that
Yep.
you can leverage Salesforce as the source, if you will, and just use leverage Salesforce as the source and use Slack as the kind of UI engagement interface to leverage and reuse those tools. I think it's actually brilliant and well done to the product managers making this happen.
Totally. It's totally going in the right direction. If I could get it to go faster, it'd be great. But, everything has to take time and be debugged and performance tested and planned and architected. Eventually it's going to be, I've seen things like mock-ups of modal builders. Like you want to do a pop-up in Slack when you do /command and have it pop up and do something, just like, designing a Lightning app page, we're prototyping something, safe harbor, who knows when it'll be released, of ways to actually build that interface for non-programmers. How can I build a command really easily to go do something in Salesforce? So there's lots of good things there. Also on unofficialsf.com, which is a sort of, if you're in the know website.
It's an early release
Flow
model for Flow extensions and stuff like that.
So there's an early release Flow model there for Slack interactions between your Salesforce org and Slack using Flow. So now there's 3 or 4 flavors out there. Back in September, when I was working on this, my own Slack experience, I was working on something like that too. How do I get an invocable action, which is a kind of Apex code, to be available to my Flow, so my Flow can go push what's called block kit, which is the markup for Slack messages, out to a Slack channel or a Slack user. Anyways, it's going totally in the right direction. It's becoming productized and mainstream. And I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, I think it's really a great extension of that Flow first model that Salesforce decided to move towards, roughly middle of last year. And now this is just an extension, because now we're going to get a checkbox on Flow for Slack where I can just say, hey, this is a Flow. It works great inside the org from the contact page, but I also want it to be available from this /command in Slack, which I just think is brilliant. And I get to reuse that technology in another location where, roughly 60% of workers today want to use it right from their messaging interface. So they
do. And when Mark Benioff said Slack is the new Salesforce user interface, I did not get it. And more as we implement Slack commands at Salesforce, as our team, not even just our teams, but our team managers, our team directors, who are people managers over us, for in my case, sales engineering, they're implementing their own workflows in my situation, if I can't make a call with a customer, I can actually submit a workflow in Slack and have it notify my team, put it up for grabs, see who wants to grab the event, my description for the kind of coverage I need somebody who knows integration, I need somebody who knows security to get on the call. It goes to my whole team and we can cover each other in a much more structured way without, that's just a quick workflow, without having to go build it in Salesforce. That's just a workflow. So that's just one example of that's an easy way we're doing it. And just I saw some demos recently about even working with partners on customer cases where the partner is doing support for the case and spinning up a channel between support and the partner, possibly inviting the customer. Everybody can collaborate. It's all in one place, and just some internal, external collaboration too. I'm seeing. So lots more examples coming. It is very exciting.
Yeah, super cool. So what have you been learning lately?
So lots of things have happened, all in my current position. That's still the same as before. I've been doing some troubleshooting / best practice. We'll talk about that later. Best practice finding, determination, documentation for my customers. And one thing came up that I didn't know. One thing I learned lately is I didn't know that, when you have Salesforce and you have a customer community, you can set up your customer community so it has roles. So it's called a customer community plus license. Gives you the, maybe if the customer is Accenture, maybe there's a primary relationship manager, the executive role, and then there's a manager role and a subordinate role. There's 3 roles typically in the hierarchy. And I didn't know what happened is that when you turn on that, when you allocate that license, I think this is actually partner related, or it's account owner related. So let's say Accenture is the customer. That account has an account owner. There is a virtual hierarchy that connects the account owner to the partner or the customer roles. So that's fine, except in a situation where whoever implemented Salesforce for the sales team put all the account executives and the manager in the same role. And the problem that was arising is that every account executive could see every customer's cases and opportunities because all the customer users roll up to the same role. So it was just a level of complexity. I always assumed, sure, why wouldn't that work? Why would you? It's kind of a pain in the butt for a company to define a role for every leaf in the upside down tree that is the role hierarchy. But when you think about if depending on the security needs you have, sometimes it's super important to give every account executive their own role, and that role is the name of the territory. You are the Bay Area 1 territory, the Bay Area 2 territory, the Bay Area 3 for the enterprise accounts, whatever. So that's how we're laid out in Salesforce, and so I'm used to it. But I never realized, that could actually be a problem. So what I learned lately is I had no idea about that. I also learned on a different topic that a bunch of new releases came out. The last release was the winter or the spring 22 was what I was thinking about when I wrote this. And now we're already getting ready for June for the next summer one. So Flows came out with some updates. And one of the updates in Flows is order of execution. So it used to be a no-no to have more than one after update flow on an object. It's sometimes the easy thing you do. Two different teams want to do something when the account fields change over time. They don't work with each other. They don't want to do the work to find out who already wrote the after update flow on accounts. And can I modify that and figure out where my update fits in the order of everything else? Well, now there's actually an order of execution field on some flavors of flow where it's relevant. And you can just write multiple flows on one object that are all the same kind. And I want you to correct me if you think differently, but I've asked about this. And so I think I'm right. And so you don't have to worry about the large negative impacts that we used to worry about with things like triggers or old flow before we are on an old architecture, or workflows where when the account changes, multiple workflows fire in succession.
Or process builders.
Process builder. Yeah. And you get into a cycle of repeatedly firing the triggers that happen when it gets recursive. That's right. Repeatingly. Don't you get what I mean? Repeatingly. Recursively is the word I was looking for. So cool update there just from a flow perspective. Flow keeps getting better. Orchestration is a new capability in Flow that you'll find in the same menu. Just page over a couple screens. And so that's becoming a more and more powerful part of the system. And as you and I talked about maybe 7-8 episodes ago, if you can go with Flow, go Flow. No more process builders. Try to avoid triggers, but sometimes triggers are the way to go. Flow is
especially
really
for large data volumes and kind of like you got to use Apex for large data volumes and kind of elements where you exceed the governor limits on number of records on a flow. Absolutely. But hopefully they'll resolve that soon. I know there's some items on the roadmap to do flow for much more higher bandwidth activities. But I agree. Those are great updates. And I agree with you. I mean, certainly, right. It's been our allergy to have, we try and keep our Apex classes pretty lean per object, try and keep our flows pretty lean per object. However, I've heard as well that the impact is no longer significant. And if you think about not only order of execution without using Orchestrator, right, that's certainly supported on certain flows, like I believe it's before update and after update. But you also have the flow orchestrator, which enables you to use lots of miscellaneous individual flows and put them exactly where they should be and not where they shouldn't be. And so I think we've gotten back to that idea that we can do something consolidated, right? Yeah. There is a place for that. Yeah. But also there's a place for, as you mentioned, right? There's operational and organizational concerns about who is the custodian of this code and of this resource and of this kind of technical feature. And it's not always going to be in that collaborative environment where everybody is going to be able to kind of get on the same page. So there needs to be a way to distribute the work effectively, but still come together and stitch a fabric that creates a common solution that's predictable.
Yeah. If I can lead us into, well, I'll talk about it more later. We'll talk about ownership of sectors, or the word you just used. Like it's escaping me, but like we're going to talk later about how I saw what happened when you don't have that.
Yes.
In like just a couple minutes. We'll come up to that in a second.
Perfect. Well, I think that there's a great time now. We'll have notes in the show notes, just giving you some links to some of these resources that we've just talked about, because they're definitely good changes and welcome changes. So well done to the Flow product management team. Yeah. We love seeing what's going on there. And so let's talk about just one small thing.
Yeah.
And I think we have a couple today, which is great. So I think one thing I saw in a project recently, and this is challenging. I've talked before about the business analysis function inside of a business. It's really underappreciated, this idea. I mean, I love that more and more businesses have kind of enablement groups, sales enablement, marketing enablement, because their function is just to support the processes, systems, and technical needs of their teams. So it's essentially like kind of an old school IT team that's much more like modern and new school in their systems, but they're just focused on that one team, and they perform in many respects the business analysis function. Like, what do you need? What are the systems and processes we can put together to give you what you need so you can be effective, and we essentially underwrite and enable your goals, right?
Yeah.
And that helps the business at large. So I was working with an organization who did not have any enablement group, and they didn't have any business analysis, like no business analysts, no project managers. They essentially just expected, and here's the one small thing. The one small thing is the expectation that my functional users will just also pick up the slack on Salesforce too. So the sales team, they'll just handle like whatever needs to be done on Salesforce, any management, customizations, like support.
That is what we told people to do about 15 years ago.
So
it is.
They are still looking at that prescription and hoping that it's going to work out for them, which I think 15 years ago, right? Probably roughly 13 years ago, we all realized that, we're going to need a little bit more attention on this. That can't just be a little bit of breadcrumbs and a little bit of margin time from someone who's got something else to do.
I can totally relate to that. I've been involved with orgs in the past where I was sort of like the volunteer admin. It's really hard to be a good volunteer admin, a good part-time admin. To remember what I did 2 months ago, I have to keep my own notes about what the whole technical debate was, my if-else statement that's going to be in a formula field, whatever the logic was. It's like, oh, why was I putting that off? I have to go back and read my notes. And that's me. And for me, the setup menu is not the obstacle, It's so like I even have that in my favor, and it's really going to keep back to you. It's just really hard to be a temporary admin, part-time admin.
It is, and I think the one small thing is whoever the leader is, leadership in the organization, whoever the key stakeholder is, who's going to kind of champion Salesforce in the organization. Don't make that one small mistake of just assuming that the team will just pick up the slack and perform.
So, what would you say
function
to a okay, so business analyst function? I was going to say, can you dedicate an admin? We used to say, and when I was coming up through Salesforce, how many admins do you need for org? We used to say back in the day, 1 for 200 employees, for just administration and stuff like that. What do you say about hiring a full-time admin, or maybe that's not the question, having a business analyst and an admin? It's
a good question, and I think you're 1 to 200 users, maybe that's a good benchmark. What about organizations that have like 15 users? It's not that they don't have any business BA or Salesforce admin needs. And so I think that just the reality of understanding this probably goes back to a little bit of my allergy to, I like, people in an organization to be valued for their time. And if more work is given to them, there needs to be a trade-off. It's kind of like the agile Scrum kind of model. If you're going to add more stories to a sprint, we need to trade off and pull more stories out.
Right. You can't just overload somebody.
We have a fixed amount of resources available, right?
Yep.
So I think that let's say an organization with 15 people, they may not have the need to hire a full-time admin, but let's just say they're going to need a quarter-time admin. And that quarter-time admin, if they don't already know Salesforce, they're going to probably need another quarter of their time to research and learn what it is that they're going to do in that other quarter time. So now they're a halftime admin. And so you can't expect a halftime admin to be like split between one or two salespeople, and you're going to give them no discount on their quota, and you're going to give them no, right? No.
Hey, but you want to move up, don't you, Mr. Salesperson? I need
Right?
you to take on these responsibilities so you can move to management.
Sure, right?
Get you the better territory.
It's a totally different mentality, and so giving it to the right role, like a salesperson, it's probably not a good idea. And then maybe there's another administrative person or operations person, but they also have other responsibilities. Typically we just have to be kind of fair and prudent about that. This is a real investment, and if you're going to get Salesforce, it's not just about paying for the software. It's not just about paying for the implementation from a partner to implement the software. It's about really investing in the ownership of that software in the organization and making sure there's someone who's committed to making it happen, fielding requests, building confidence in the organization, and who is incentivized to continue the learning. So there's 200 pages of release notes that relate to them that are coming out every 3 to 5 months. Somebody's got to be focused on that, and they can't just be expected to do it at home when they should be having dinner with their family. That's not sustainable. And so that's what I saw here, is that they just expected the salespeople to just pick it up on their own. And it goes against the best practice of not having so many sysadmins, right? You do not want to have a bunch of sysadmins spanning across the sales team so that they can just pick up the slack. I mean, that is just a time bomb waiting to go off from an operational perspective.
So what you're saying is this is not a best practice. This is a worst practice.
This I would say is this is going to lead to org confession.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we already have 1,000 of those up online, so we don't need any more of those. And
so really, I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. What are org confessions?
Org confessions, it's a website that was put up. I'm forgetting who right now. We'll put it in the notes, but basically they're anonymous submissions of like
the worst thing you ever did to an org
that I've done. And many of the just one small things that we've talked about, like I just saw one, for example, David Liu at Google highlighted one. And he said, here's the one he liked the best. He's like, I deleted a field which broke 400 reports, 15 workflow rules. And he's like, and it took 2 weeks of my life. It stole 2 weeks of my life.
Oh my God. You know what I love about this? I'm pulling it up now on the web. Coincidentally, it's hosted by Elements Cloud.
Yes, Elements Cloud. I believe that one of the founders of Elements Cloud was the guy who came up with it, which is brilliant.
It's so great. What a great marketing connection to your admins. So I was going to bring up Elements Cloud earlier, and it's going to come up again later. But it's basically, you told me about it 6 months ago, and it's a great tool to document your org.
Yes. So here's this nod, Elements Cloud. We'd love to have you as a sponsor. Great product. And thanks so much for your support.
I think you're a user. Sometimes with your clients, I'm just a tinkerer.
I'm a user and a partner. So we
okay.
we are a partner with them.
So anyway, so it's on Elements Cloud. You can just Google org confessions, and I haven't even read through them yet, but I love we're on a confession 1226 when you stumble across a bunch of standard fields that the previous admin is set to hidden for the system admin profile. So whatever, there's good ones there. And I love how they're written.
If you don't want more of those as a leader, if you're a stakeholder and you want to make money with Salesforce and you want to get people onboarded and have them internalize this and have a really strong business process, you got to invest in the people component of that, and don't just expect that they layer it on without any consideration to their existing responsibilities and commitments.
Totally. That's a good one. Mine, you were running into a problem there with your customer in terms of maybe too many admins and maybe not enough attention to their org. I'm running into a problem with my customer where, they've been a customer for 10 years. Probably they've acquired 3 or 4 companies. They've done org merges. They just move all the Apex code from the previous org into this org. And so now it's one big org. I don't know exactly what's happened over time, but all I can tell you is that this is a 80,000 person company with a lot of users on a big instance of Salesforce. And we're in a situation where, to say it politely, we need to improve our governance on the org. We need to know who owns what Apex classes and what they do. And are they still useful?
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible, we presume, that some of the code is in there. And there are some governor limits we've hit. As the org grew, it just got bigger and bigger. And, maybe it wasn't performance tested, maybe rightfully so. Or, when I used to be at Accenture, I remember being at a or learning about a huge implementation of a CRM product before Salesforce that crashed during the holidays because the performance testing was taken out of scope to meet budget and timeline. So it was a decision on behalf of the client, not Accenture or Deloitte or whoever did the implementation that, we got to hit the deadline.
Just one small thing.
And in the end, their whole Christmas season was botched because their call center couldn't respond to the calls. So anyway, the what could have happened also in this instance is they outsourced their development to a third party to do project A, B, or C. And I'm going through a lot of learning right now on code standards, code quality, governance, CI/CD. If a team is working on code together, how do we make sure that the code is actually good looking and or good, well written and formatted? And as I learned also, just one small thing, if you have a contract with an ISV and you don't tell them in the contract that they have to follow your coding standards, why should they? There's no obligation. It's extra time. It's extra learning. It's who knows? Do you run into that in your world? I know you're a fan of governance and documenting your code and using code repos, repositories for versioning and things like that. But do you run into that? How many of your customers say, oh, and by the way, here are my coding standards? Or do you teach them what the coding standards are?
It's a great question. And I think the topic is excellent. And not even if you have a contract with an ISV, I would say that any developer who's working with you, you should have some kind of document that you give them that says, look, this is what we do. At a minimum, it's like we don't use copy and paste copyrighted works. We want no one else's work product, right? We need to do what we're doing or have a documented open source, legal use. And we certainly advocate, and we have our own list of how we write code, and we share that with the client.
Good.
And we encourage them to adopt it. But we find, I'd say it's probably less than 20% of clients really even think about it. Their primary objective is like, does it work?
Yeah, right. And you don't learn. It's sort of like, I can grow tomatoes, but my mom just taught me that if you plant tomatoes 3 inches deeper, all of the soil that covers the 3 inches of the stalk will lead the stalk to start growing roots also. So in the end, you have a tomato plant that not only is it deeper and maybe more shielded from drying out, but now how to grow a better tomato plant. Same with this org here. If you do, everybody can write an Apex class. I can write functionality. We can get an app out, but it will be a healthier app if you do it right. And that's, I'm feeling so now it's late. Now there's 10,000 classes that need document, or whatever, 3,000 classes need documentation or exploration. Now it's an effort, and there is no short, easy, quick, snap your fingers result to understanding your org. Another one that, code standards, it'd be great if there was a list somewhere. I know there's all kinds of best practices out across the web for, rules for static code analysis and code formatting and stuff like that. Another one is, of course, you wouldn't be the first person to write a test class and fudge your way through getting to 70% code coverage with some extra lines in there. I'm not going to say how to do it.
Smoke and mirror.
You just make your test class long enough.
Lots of math.
And I was listening to the Salesforce developer podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about how the podcast leader was at a company, and he found a class that was a test class that was 8 pages long, just doing math operations. And so he printed them all out.
Assert 1 equal 1 plus 1.
1 plus. And then he taped it to the wall and he wrote fireable offense.
Yes. Good.
If I find that you've written a test class, this is grounds for termination. If it is just yanking Salesforce's chain and just barely make the thing. So it's things like that whatever, it works.
Well,
but it's not.
You bring up a couple points, and I always want to highlight whenever I can. We as users and developers on Salesforce, we are in a partnership with Salesforce. Now, this is a variety of ways, and this is one of the things I love working with Salesforce. Why? One is they give us the ability to prioritize the roadmap. We can highlight, I want these things in this order. We can put up ideas on the App Exchange, what they have said. If you get a certain number of votes, we guarantee we will bring that and evaluate it into our product. And 3, when you write test code and it's good, every Salesforce release hammer tests your test code as part of their QA process. That is so important. So your test code is not just for you, it's for everybody across Salesforce to make sure that that release works with what you have, which is likely what other people have. And it's part of the partnership that we have with Salesforce. And we need to not abscond or otherwise avoid the opportunity we have to contribute in that way. So definitely a soapbox topic for me.
I love that.
But I will say, back to the element around governance, what's important at a minimum is that people have some sense of kind of a custodial relationship, like who owns this code, right? As contractors come and go, like you got to have it, have a header at the top of every class, every trigger. Who wrote this? When was it? What was its general goal? Because any other developer that goes in there, they can at least read that and be like, okay, I understand what the goal was. I know who this was. I can try and track them down, whatever. Secondly, I love aspects of Salesforce that are self-documenting. We use help tips on fields. We use, the path on objects, right? Because it kind of makes the process self-documenting. Now we get to use, the, what are they called? The alerts, or the little pop-ups that come in the bottom right-hand corner.
Notifications, maybe. I'm not sure.
It's, I'll get the name in the notes, but basically it allows you to put
like the walk me type stuff. It's the guided.
It's the prompts, right? That kind of say, hey, I'll show this. I can show this twice. The first 2 times they look at this page, I'll highlight this. I can put a little video in there. That's all self-documenting stuff. Beautiful. Even the description fields on fields and objects behind the scenes in the setup area. Those are all helpful. One area that you do not want to be solely self-documenting in Salesforce is how you're using Apex triggers and Apex classes and flows and guided engagement, or all these things. Like you can
the logic
together
stuff.
the logic, right? You want to have the fabric be defined somewhere else. And so we recommend people maintain what we call a solution design document, which is basically just a high level picture of like, hey, I wanted to create a solution so that people could request PTO. And so here, all I did is I put together a couple custom objects. I used these 2 flows. We might have imports of all of this with more than 50,000 records. So I did have this Apex class that we use to invoke over here when we have paging required. And I have a web service call out to the Oracle HR app right here. Okay, that's 2 paragraphs. That allows any developer to be like, I get it. I see all the various components. I see how they all get stitched together. Because Salesforce will tell you like, oh, on this Apex class, who wrote it, what it was supposed to do. But it won't tell you the fact that it's part of this much bigger stitching together of a solution. That's what your solution design doc is for. And that will save you so much time in root cause analysis and onboarding of resources that it is worth its letters and golds.
Yes. And I'm thinking about how to tie that into some recent diagrams I've seen on how to ensure code quality. What if you ensured there was always documentation? There's probably a rule out there that can say you can't check the code in unless there's description at the top that's more than just 3 lines, whatever it is. You can automate the enforcement of these rules so that it becomes the computer telling the developer, nope, sorry, you can't check in your code right now.
So one call out on that is Capado. Love to have you as a sponsor. So Capado will enable quality rules, and it will inspect the code. And if there's not something like those comments or something like that kind of highlights what it is that they're doing, or the documentation, or a link to a document, or whatever it might be, it'll reject the commit.
Yeah. Anyway, I think just picking standards, enforcing them through automation, even if you use the out-of-the-box standards that come with some of the tools. One's called PMD. There are some others. Just turn that on. Let it be the bad guy telling people what they need to do, and you're already on a step towards code quality. The next step is maybe
and just the fact that you're introducing an idea that there's an evaluation criteria, a success factor that's beyond does it work? It's a really important thing. That just expands everybody's mind. Like, okay, yeah, it can work, but it can work badly. It can work in a way that's not sustainable, right? It can work in a way that like Salesforce is not going to prevent you from putting SQL queries inside of a loop. It's going to recommend you don't do that, but it won't stop you.
Right.
And so somebody has to be there. There has to be some governance, some inspection, some code review to make sure that things like that never happen. right? For using static IDs inside code. It's like, you need to enable yourself to use a sandbox. I can't tell you how many times I found that code that prevents them from using a sandbox. And you're like, why wasn't somebody looking at this? Because now you've really painted yourself, not only painted, you have now like bricked yourself into a corner, and you have to demolish the walls to get
it's a rebuild.
the corner.
It is
Bad.
Oh, I haven't even thought about that. Yeah, that's bad. So the point is there for people who didn't know it, the record IDs change between production and sandboxes, except in full copy sandboxes. But anyways, you can't just spin up a sandbox and have your code work if you've hard coded IDs into your code. Right. Nobody on this podcast would probably ever do that. But I never thought about how that actually bricks you into not being able to spin up a sandbox and use the records. I think that's painful.
Painful. Absolutely. All right, cool. So let's talk about,
what are you excited about?
We're talking about, what makes you excited of late? What we're excited about?
Well, I've been really leaning nerdy lately. Probably it's been 6 months that I've been nerdy, but I'm going to keep going with it.
Does that mean you're listening to Acapella Science on YouTube? Because that's
no,
but
maybe I should listen to that.
Okay, we'll put one of them. It's called the Nerd a manifesto.
All right.
Makes you excited about it.
I'm intrigued already.
I'll give you one lyric. Ready? That life is brain boxing and you are Lord of the Ring.
That's pretty deep. I'll have to go check it out. Put the link in there. So my nerdy thing is my customer came to me and said, hey, why is this page slow? And I said, I don't know. So, and it was, I've been through a performance analysis in Lightning before with a customer 2 years ago. And so I learned a bunch of tricks. And so this time in 10 hours, I was able to go do all my tricks at once and figure out what the deal was. And the short is I learned that they had a custom component they built that was doing a query. And when they do a Control R refresh on the page, it's taking 14 seconds to load the page. And I would complain too.
Right.
And so then I ran it and it took 7 seconds on my computer. So, and I used the same user, the same query. I mean, technically different networks between my house and their work and whatever, but we're all going to the same Salesforce data center, the same sandbox. And after doing back-end Apex performance analysis using Developer Console and front-end high-level performance measurement using the browser's developer tools, where you can actually record the page loading and then you can figure out when was it making call outs and when was it drawing
what images are taking too long, what JavaScript files are taking too long.
Yeah, cool. Exactly. So after doing that, I found out that the Lightning framework takes 2.5 seconds to load on a Control R refresh. That's like a fixed number. The other thing that you have to do that would help calibrate my 7.5 seconds and the customer's seconds time is we should both run an Octane test on our computer, because an Octane test is something written by Google that figures out how fast your computer is at processing JavaScript. And because Lightning is so JavaScript heavy, faster computer makes Salesforce faster. Unlike Visualforce, which was all server side. Mm-hmm. It was a totally different UI technology. So what I'm excited about is I was able to give the customer an understanding of down to the second what the problem was. And it turns out that 4 seconds of the problem was Apex running on their side. So 3.5 seconds on our side, 4 seconds of customer Apex. What runs for 4 seconds in Apex? That is insane for just a little widget. Their widget did queried opportunities and showed, I don't know, something like that. And so I was able to go do a cool, what I'm excited about is I gave them a good readout in detail of the problems I found. One was there's these 2 classes that are getting called. And I found this just in a dirty, simple way, unelegant, using Developer Console and its timeline features to look at the code execution, find out what classes were taking a while. That was pretty helpful, I think. I also did a debug and found out that their SOQL statement was 170 lines long.
Now, it turns 70 lines. Right?
170 lines long.
Okay.
1,500 fields in one SOQL statement. I don't know the history. They've been a customer for a long time. I think there must have been a thought for a while that everybody who needs to query the opportunity should just use this single SOQL statement and tack on the fields they might need. That an opportunity can only have 800 fields in UE. So it was actually child or related objects through lookup fields as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they realized that was an old architecture and they didn't realize they were using that. They must have gotten used by mistake. So, but it turns out also that wasn't the slow part of the execution. So Salesforce handled a query of 100 and whatever
70 lines.
1,500 fields
Yeah.
in, I don't know, half a second in a sandbox. So not on a full volume.
Sure, which is more impressive.
That was pretty cool. The other thing is, so I was able to give them a cool analysis, but then I learned how to do that. And I also thought about what I didn't yet have. And I remembered being in computer science in school. And when I was doing early programming, you could actually run your program in a context where it would analyze how many times each method was called. And you could see where the weight of the execution was coming from. It's all in my fetch command. That's what's going so slow. I need to optimize that or call it less times to make it faster. And I think it was our performance analysis team, or I had a meeting with Andrew Fawcett from Andy in the Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So he's one of our product managers now. Thank you, Andy, for taking a call from me, a stranger. I was actually reaching out to you for my customer who want to know, hey, I have all these Apex classes and I want to know what they do. And so we were talking about Apex performance, Apex measurement, log analysis. And he said, also another tool besides Developer Console to help figure out what's going slowly in your org, if you can turn on debugging, is the Financial Force Apex Log Analyzer. It's probably about 1.5 years old, as far as I can tell. I was watching some YouTube videos on it recently, and it does what I just talked about. You can do a log, a debug log of your execution, load up the log file in the analyzer.
And make it really, really finest detail.
Yeah, you
right?
got to have it in your finest or fine detail. Otherwise, apparently, there's gaps in your debug logs that prevent you from seeing the whole picture. And you can figure out in your IDE, in Microsoft Visual Code or whatever you're using to your Apex, you can go analyze again, not just does my code work, but is it ugly? And is it doing bad things?
Does it work ugly?
And so, hey, shout out to the Financial Force team. Or I don't know who built it. I think it was Financial Force because it's got their logo on it, but it's an open plugin. You can just plug into Visual Force, into Visual Code, and it'll do your analysis of the log file and give you a pretty picture of the execution tree or timeline. And then it'll also do, if you click over to the Analyze tab, it shows every method, how often it was called, and what the average execution time is with each one, and then what the total time is in that method. And for small triggers, I mean, who really cares? But when you're building an app, you want to make sure, you want to put some, if you're like in woodworking, you might want to do an extra fine finish on something with some 800 grit sandpaper. This is the final finish. And in some situations, it may be a more debulkification of your code, but it's a really amazing tool to take.
It's like finished carpentry.
It's finished carpentry.
Yes, I like it.
So that's what I'm excited about. I'm really excited about the performance analysis I've been able to get to understand and show my customer how fast Salesforce has been executing, and also where the problems were, where it's like, I mean, I don't know what this part is over here, but if you were to look into one area, this is significant. So,
wow. Well done. That's very cool.
Thanks.
I did not know about that either. I look forward to looking into it because, reading Salesforce debug logs is something I just enjoy doing with like a glass of, good sparkling wine.
Oh my God.
Not really.
I'm not even sure. Yes, it's not. This tool just makes it so much easier.
That's beautiful.
It's really cool.
That's cool. Well,
and it's free.
Yeah. No, well done, Andy and team. I mean, certainly they created the ability to do like package installs without having to go through the app exchange for just little small things. There's really just from source code you can install from a repo. It's super smart.
Yeah, super smart. What about you? What are you excited about?
So I think I'm excited about digging more into Slack, and it's really good timing because many of the items we talked about are hitting beta in May, June of this year. And they're, looking to go GA towards the end of the year. So it's really perfect timing for when I can actually take advantage of all this learning with clients, which to me is a great dovetailing. I don't like to learn things too early because they tend to change a lot before they actually come, go GA.
Yeah,
I'm really excited about that and just kind of helping. I mean, we use Slack a lot, and so just building more solutions for clients using slash commands. And it's funny because I was a Unix guy before I was like a Microsoft guy or a Mac guy, or now I'm using Linux for my desktop. But the slash command feels very much like I loved my world in the console. I just loved that I could go anywhere and find, if I wanted to do something, if I wanted to do a find and replace in binary if I wanted to do a quick, count of this or whatever, there was always a tool that I could go find on SourceForge or anything like that. And I could run it through the console, do my make install, configure, all that. And now I feel like that there's going to be a time where when people want to do things, they're going to go to Slack, they're going to push their /command, and there's going to be a list of like stuff I want to do. I want to add a new user. I want to like make an equipment request. I want to request PTO. I want to, and it's so easy to do that. And so I'm really excited to kind of enter into this new level of using the messenger as the UI. I think it's much superior to Chatter, but Chatter was kind of the precursor to this idea, and Slack just helped build an experience around it, and excited to tie them together.
That's totally cool. I understand. I knew Slack had an advantage over Chatter in that it was not only a person-to-person connection tool, but it's a person-to-system connection tool. I didn't get what that meant. I thought it was just for developers so they could get alerts when their build failed. Mm-hmm. But if you take developers out of the user base, now it's you talking to Salesforce. And on a side note, Salesforce just acquired or said it would acquire Troops.ai, which is I'm going to call it an AI tool with a library of commands that sits on top of Slack. It was a partner of Slack's, and it adds that library of common uses for sales users of Slack, common uses for service users of Slack. And, it brings a lot of business capability into /commands.
And that might be the basis for, because Salesforce is coming out with 3 apps later in the year, which are probably from those libraries. It's Sales Cloud for Slack, Service Cloud for Slack, and Marketing Cloud for Slack. And it just essentially has those common use cases that you can just turn on. Nice. Well, let's talk about we've had a great show. And so if we want to leave our listeners with kind of one kind of a quote, highlight, axiom, something that they can kind of take away and muse on, what are your thoughts?
Mine came out just out of you and I prepping, and it was, this is a quote that I say, so it's not famous. But my thought is, to me, I spent a lot of time on trying to make a Java program work this past 2 weeks, and I suck at Java. I don't even know what I'm doing really, but I was basically debugging it, trying to get it working with the current version of all the libraries that are now 10 years in the future. They're current day libraries versus when Andrew Fawcett wrote his library that I was trying to use back in 2012 that's on GitHub. And I just spent like 2 days debugging it, or debugging my version of it, so I could actually make it work with all the libraries. And it was still rewarding, even though I was debugging. And really, I've noticed years ago, the most rewarding thing for me about programming is the debugging part. I like the creative side too, but the debugging part is where you start to accelerate. It's like if you're skiing or going downhill on a bike, like you can pedal and get to where you need to go, so you can enjoy the ride downhill towards the finish line. And I find there's like a mental acceleration when I'm debugging and I'm getting through all my bugs and I'm getting all the way to the point where it runs smoothly. And, in some ways that's a form of finish line. It's probably not the only finish line, but anyways, my concept is, and nobody really goes to school to learn debugging.
Sure. And in fact,
you go to learn how to program.
Yes. And I'll just highlight that go ahead and say what is the phrase you're speaking of here?
That's it. Mine is, the most rewarding thing about development is debugging.
There you go. Right. And what I love about that is it's actually what makes you a great debugger is that you are emotionally committed to seeing this through in the highest way possible. That's what makes most people, debugging is a roadblock, especially if you're debugging something that doesn't work. I would say even further than that, there's a beauty in debugging something that's already working, but could work better. It's kind of like if you're a finished carpenter, back to the finished carpenter for coding, and you have your mantle that you put over the, or a countertop or whatever, and you're like, dude, this looks beautiful, but what do you do to make sure it's really good? You get a level out and you put it down. And when that bubble goes right to the middle, you're like, that is now
that
awesome.
Is so rewarding.
Validated, right?
It's validating.
It's validated. And I think it's such a good thing that it's not just about it working. It's about, given within your budget, time frame, all that kind of stuff, making it work as best as it can, given the constraints. It's like putting the level on it and saying, all right, now it not only works, but it works really, really well. And that's something I can be proud of, because I was emotionally committed to that outcome. And I can sleep well knowing that I did awesome work and I can walk away from that.
Yep. What's yours?
That's the kind of guy you are. I love it.
I try to do good work.
Right. So a similar element something I've experienced of late is, we have our practice here is that we like to land and expand clients that we love, projects that we love, right? So somebody might come in, they start with a small project, we love them. So we find other ways we can help them. And sometimes we turn, a 20-hour project into a 250, 500, 1,000-hour project over years.
With their consent.
Of course. We don't do it like, no, they're the ones saying yes to everything. Like, I didn't even know you could help me there. Yes, I didn't even know I could use Salesforce for that. The opposite is that we like to sunset and close out projects that don't go well. And it's usually because they have no business analyst function. They have no appreciation for what we're bringing to the table. They're trying to outsource. And so one of the examples of this is many times, right, we know the platform well. So when someone brings their own business process and says, this is what I like to do, this is the secret sauce I want to serve to my customers that really differentiates us, that's why people buy Salesforce. You don't use it out of the box. You bend Salesforce so that it aligns to what you want to do. But let's say you don't know what you want to do, and you don't want to spend the effort to figure out with your team what exactly you want to do. So what do? Well, you come to the consultant and you ask, we want to do this, but what's the best practice for this whole process of starting
I get that all the time.
And then moving all the way through to fulfillment. What's the best practice on that? It's like asking what's the best practice for making a sandwich? There is no best practice for making a sandwich. Like, do you like wheat or white? Do you like flatbread? Right. Do you like mayo or mustard? I don't know. These are all preferences that the business has to customize the sandwich. Now, once you figure out that, hey, we like whole wheat sandwich, we like turkey, we like Swiss cheese, we like mayo and mustard, one on each piece of the toast, we like tomatoes. Okay, now we can get into best practice, which is this is how you spread the mayo. Use a knife, not a fork, right? Yeah. This is how you slice the cheese. Don't make it too thick, right? This is how you slice the tomato. Don't put the tomato next to the bread. It makes it soggy. Put the lettuce in between, right? Now we have best practice once you know what you want to do. And so I think that's my kind of quote is there isn't a best practice for making a sandwich, but there is one for spreading the mayo. And it's just important to not overextend the use of that because sometimes we just have to know what the client needs and no one can divine that or come up with that for them.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I mean, when I worked at Accenture, we used to talk about how, we know the best practices and we want you to come to us and we will share the best practices. And we did have thought leaders from industry who talked at a business level, or we probably had technical architects who could talk at a technical topic level, like, integration architecture or, scalability or stuff like that. But for process, I'm not sure. Once you get down to design, I'm not sure best practice I'm getting myself in a hole here, but I think there's a gap here between what a customer needs and best practice. And there's always going to be like a mapping to that. And the best practice won't fit exactly. There's an interpretation.
Yes.
And I get the question all the time. My customer is like, what's the best practice on, partner community management? First of all, I'm a sales engineer, so I'm pre-sales. So I don't do the implementations of Salesforce this way. And I also don't do detailed design of implementations. So I'm probably not the right person. I do see what my customers ask for a lot. So I can tell you what I hear commonly, but the whole best practice word, I think, comes from the big 5 consultancies who have taught people to ask for that because they do have people who've seen this around the world and who can get together in forums and talk about, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this? But unless you're working with one of them, and if you had a Salesforce consultant, you might go to them and say, hey, what's a rollout best practice? Oh, well, we have some things we don't do. We try to avoid big bang.
Sure.
We try to do, there's things that are best practice, but I think scope of best practice is something important to think about when you're asking for that. Like sometimes the scope is too big and you can't give a best practice. Yeah. And I love that. That makes me feel better as somebody who gets asked best practices. I have no problem telling people like, I'm not your guy because I'm not the implementer. This is what I can tell you what I've seen. But also you got to be careful when you ask for best practice, maybe ask for, well, what are the best practices or at what level do you have best practices or, how can we get to using those best practices? Yep. Because rarely is a customer happy with what the best practice is that's an industry-wide thing, because they have legacy context that they will have to marry with the best practice, and they're probably can't afford, not just not going to do it, they can't afford to rewrite everything they used to do just to fit the best practice. The change management would be insane.
It's a good point. Yeah. And best practice as well, if you're wanting to outflank your peers and you're just going to do the best practice that everybody else thinks, right? Then you're not outflanking your peers, right? You're not innovating.
Just keeping up with the Joneses.
Right. You just exactly. So, and most what people consider best practice, in my opinion, or what is realistically best practice, is really about how we do things, not what we're going to do. We have to decide what we're going to do. And yes, there are some elements, like, for example, with user experience, like, oh, okay, how do we put an alert in front of a user? Well, there's only, there's only so many ways to do that, because human behavior expects something specific. But in most areas, what we're going to do is really up to you. And there is no best practice. It is a decision. It's a subjective decision of the business.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah. Well, we had a very long show today. I hope all of you enjoyed it. We'd love your feedback. I just want to share that for anyone who wants to check in and ask us a question, leave us a problem, whatever it might be, you can call 540-TRIAL-75. That's 540-TRIAL-75. Leave us a message, and we'd love to feature you on the show to answer your questions and to just interact. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for listening.
Good talking to you.